This podcast is made possible in part by Patreon support, and I'd like to say thank you to our newest patron, Jorg Kolberg. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. I apologize if I didn't, but again, thank you so much for your support. I really do appreciate the wonderful message you sent me as well. And for you, the listener, if you would like to join the Patreon and be a supporter of this show and make sure that I can keep bringing you more content like this, then head on over to japankyo.com/Patreon and sign up for as little as $1 a month. Welcome to Japan Station, a production of japankyo.com. I'm your host, Tony Vega. All right, so let's just get right into it. Today, you're going to get to hear a conversation with somebody really unique. I don't think I've ever interviewed somebody quite like this individual, someone who does what he does. But his name is James Reynolds, and he documents extreme weather, not just in Japan, in other countries, especially, around Asia, but otherwise other places as well. But, his base of operations is Japan. That's where he lives. That's where he's based. And he has documented a lot of extreme weather in Japan, including some of the recent very cold and snowy conditions that have been going on, especially back in January, because we recorded this a few weeks ago. And he's just a really interesting guy. This is what he does. He chases extreme weather events and documents them, and that's how he makes his living. He sells this footage to big companies, and that's pretty awesome. So today you're going to get to hear a conversation with him. It's really interesting. Hope you enjoy it. Here it is. Here's my conversation with James Reynolds.
The next stop is Japan Station. The doors on the right side will open.
Great. So you are the first storm chaser I've had on the show.
I'm honored. It's thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I mean, I kind of basically said what you do, but I mean, could you give us a little general idea, like how long have you been doing this and what kind of things you've done?
Yeah, so basically I'm a video producer. That's what I call myself, but with a very kind of unusual, specific niche of going after wild natural events. So severe weather, hurricanes, typhoons, volcanic eruptions. I love snow. So this time of year, I'm trying to get myself into as much snow as I can. But yeah, I've been doing this since, as a hobby since 2005. And then I kind of went fully, professional in 2010. So, it's coming on close to 17, 18 years, something like that.
Yeah. So, well, all right. So you're based in Japan, and you have covered a lot of, Japan related weather events, recently the snow, and I know you've talked about typhoons, and you've covered, down in Okinawa and different parts of Japan. So before we get deeper into the whole weather aspect of things, I'm this is a very Japan focused show. I'm curious, how did you end up in Japan of all places? What took you there?
Yeah, well, it's been a bit of a kind of a long circular route because the whole journey, I think, started when I was at university in Scotland. A very long way away, but my studies were in Chinese. So that was kind of my focus back then. And that kind of took me, once I graduated, to China. So I lived in Shanghai for a while as a foreign student, leading a really fun life, and that's where I met my future wife, who happens to be Japanese. So,
interesting.
Yeah, so we met in Shanghai, and then as we both started working, we moved down to Hong Kong and spent 7 years there, and that's where kind of my work really started taking off, because there's so much going on Hong Kong's doorstep. Weather events in the Philippines, and lots of stuff going on in Japan, which is pretty close. So that's when I started coming to Japan, first off as a tourist. And then, once we got married, had kids, we eventually made the decision, well, Japan would be a nice place to bring up, a good place to bring up the kids. And that's why we eventually moved here about 6 years ago now.
Okay. That is very interesting. So your wife is Japanese, but you guys met in China.
Yeah, exactly. So, we're quite, and she used to study in the UK, but I never, that's where I'm from originally, but I never, that was before we even knew each other. So we're kind of quite international.
Very cool. So, all right. So then, adjusting to life in Japan, how was that? I mean, you already had, the background in Chinese, and you had spent time in Asia in general, but then Japan is its own thing. So how did that go? Did you start like learning the language, or like did you have a tough time adjusting, or what's up with that?
I thought it was going to be a breeze because I see myself as someone who's pretty adaptable. But it was a little harder than I was expecting because Hong Kong is a super easy place to live, just from, as a foreign dude, you can get by in English. All the government stuff and bureaucracy can all be done in English. Obviously speaking a bit of Chinese, I could, get by in that as well. So I kind of took that for granted. And then I moved to Japan, like as, a mid 30 something dad. And it was like, wow, I kind of wish I was one of these young guys over here in their 20s who's just going out every night and meeting people and speaking Japanese. That wasn't my life. I was very much kind of like looking after the kids and leading, a great life, but a little bit of a sheltered life. So, it was very much relying on the help of my wife to begin with, just navigating a lot of new stuff. Japan's kind of bureaucracy is a bit crazy. I'm sure.
Just registering to live there and this and that and all the paperwork.
What is all this? But now, and I think even in the last 5 years, things have got a lot easier. Not just because I'm used to it, but systems are improving, things are getting a little more efficient and stuff. So it was. But now the first year was a little bit like whoa. And Japanese is a hard language. I thought Chinese was hard. Japanese is actually, in my opinion, on another level harder than Chinese.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I mean, you make a good point. Like it's, of course you can go in your 20s and just party all day long and not learn that much Japanese. I've seen examples like that.
I'm sure there are plenty.
Yeah, but it is easier to socialize and go out and spend time on hobbies. And if you play your cards the right way, that could be some of the best opportunities to actually learn the language because you're talking to people, right? And that's the best way.
And I like to use the pandemic as an excuse. I know it's bad, but so people go. I know if people are being a bit judgy, like Japanese should be better. Well, there was the pandemic. You weren't supposed to be talking. Bad excuses. I know, but no. I look at Japanese studying. It's a lot of fun. I'm treating it like a lifelong journey. So I'm not. My Japanese should be better than it is. I can get by, but I don't have the confidence to like broadcast myself publicly and on Twitter or interviews or whatever in Japanese. That would just be a mess. But I think you just got to have fun with it and just go with the flow and
No, but again, but like I said, it's totally different when you go there in your 30s, you're married, you have kids, as opposed to you're a foreign exchange student and you're there to do that. That's your goal, right? So it's different points in your life. And you are a very interesting person in the fact that you have a very unique career and you've been able to use Japan as your, kind of base and you're able to work in Japan, but also outside of Japan. And I think that's something not that many people are able to do, right? It's very tough to get out of that English bubble. So
it's something I try not to take for granted. Just the fact that I was able to transplant my entire life, from Hong Kong where I had the business going and just move to Japan and restart it here without, having to do much at all. Unlucky to be able to do that because I do recognize that not many people are in that position. So, but in life you got to seize these opportunities. And
definitely,
like Japan, sign me up. I'm up for some of that. Yes, please.
All right, so then I do want to talk about some of the weather stuff that you've covered in Japan. But before that, let's. So how is it that you got started in this whole like storm chasing and documenting all this stuff? Like, what was your first kind of venture into this field?
Well, I think it all starts with growing up in the UK where the weather is just so boring. It's like nothing much exciting happens.
Yeah.
So whenever something unusual did happen, as a big snowstorm or some thunderstorms or whatever, those events are pretty rare. So when they did happen, it was like, oh, this is cool. But it wasn't until a uni student, I was in Taiwan in 2004, I think it was. 2005. Anyway, I was just over there on a couple of months Chinese language scholarship, having a great time. And then suddenly I was rudely awoken to the fact that, oh, wow, Taiwan gets typhoons, really big ones. And there's one coming at us this week. I was like, whoa. So I kind of was in the right place at the right time, I suppose, to just get a first-hand view of like one of these wild weather events. And from then on, I was just like, whoa, this is something else. I was kind of hooked on it. And then the next storm that came along, I just wanted to take a slightly closer look at it. And it kind of just spiraled from there, really. In the subsequent years, I held down like a video production job in Shanghai, but on the side, I was asking my boss for time off to go chase storms and stuff. But, it took a while. It took, 4 or 5 years to get into the swing of it. And, even to this day, I'm still trying to figure it all out.
So is that your main like source of income then now? Like, is that your main focus?
Yeah, absolutely. Video production. So what I do is, I have this library of footage that I've shot over the last 17 years or so. That just sits there and people come along. It's like a shop, basically. People, anyone from, say, student filmmakers who are doing something for their class. Well, yeah, you can have that for free. Good luck. To, feature films in Hollywood. Yeah, okay, it's going to be slightly more expensive for you, but that's basically how it works. I own everything I shoot. I have this big library, and I license it out to whoever needs it.
I mean, but that's 17 years of work and building up that library, right? Like it takes a while.
No, it does, and I do some work for the news agency people as well, so CNN and the Weather Channel and people like that. I've had a relationship with for a long time. So when something's happening, that helps pay for the expenses on the trip.
Sure.
But yeah, it's that library of stuff, and I'm out there just shooting, and collecting all this footage, and that's what keeps me afloat.
Yeah. So I've lived in a bunch of places, but for a long time I lived in Miami, Florida,
nice.
And we'd get hurricanes over there, right?
Yeah.
And some bad ones. Like I wasn't there for some of the worst ones, but I was there when Katrina kind of skated by. Yeah. Like it didn't hit us directly, but we were out. We didn't have power for like 5-6 days and stuff. So like, and in the summer we get these like crazy like thunderstorms that like they just and then it's like 20 minutes and then it's like sunny again. So. And then I think it was like 2007, the first time that I went to Japan, and I was in Kagoshima, and it was in the summer, and they got a typhoon. And everybody's like, oh my God, it's a typhoon. You have to stay in and this and that. And to me, coming from Florida, from Miami, it's like, this typhoon wasn't that bad. Like, it really wasn't. It was kind of like a dark day, rainy, and a little bit of wind, and it wasn't that bad. But over the years, like since back then, since 2007, it seems like every year there's like worse and like storms and flooding, and especially in the Kyushu area. And it seems like they're more frequent. Have you kind of felt the same thing? Have you seen like more and more like of these bigger weather events in Japan?
Yeah, certainly. It seems that every summer now, massive floods somewhere in Japan are the norm. And this is just purely anecdotally. I don't kind of remember it being like that. Even just a few years ago. Even since I've moved here, there's a lot of possible different reasons for that. We've been in a kind of El Nino, La Nina. In a La Nina phase for a few years now, so that might be contributing to. It's not an area of my real expertise, but one thing for sure is Japan is incredibly vulnerable to these devastating floods. Not only from typhoons, but also from like the rainy season front in June and July. That's been really bad in the last few years as well, and it's been really surprising. But before then, we had these big typhoons in 2018 and 2019. Typhoon seasons were brutal in Japan, and then nothing for 2 years until last year. It's funny the way it just goes in cycles like that. But it's something which I watch with very closely, but also it's just like, oh my gosh, again,
Yeah. I mean, you hear about Kyushu, especially in the past few years.
Exactly,
it's pretty sad, and I'm sure many people they've been losing homes and things like that, and it's sad. But what can you remember, like what your first kind of weather experience was in Japan?
That's a good question. I think it would have been back in 2005, where I was, I'd say, an apprentice with a more experienced adventure filmmaker, storm chaser guy. And he'd come to Taiwan for a typhoon, and I'd send him an email going like, hey, look, I'll happily kind of help you out with translation and stuff. If you're in Taiwan, I can speak Chinese okay, and help you if I can ride along. And he was like, yeah, sure. So we hooked up and filmed a typhoon in Taiwan. And then literally about 4 days later, there was another one coming, swinging up through Okinawa. So I was like a young guy, like 21, 22. I'm like jumping on a plane to Okinawa, just loving this adventure and everything. The typhoon kind of missed by miles, but it was just that first kind of taste of being in Japan. Okinawa, I don't know if many people outside the military, their first place they ever go in Japan is Okinawa, but it was a good place to get a first, a taste of the place. And then after that, it was a few years, but then it was back to Okinawa most of the time. And it was only until I moved, obviously my wife being from Tokyo, I'd come here on family visits and stuff. But it wasn't until I really moved to Japan that I started kind of exploring and really getting a good sense of the place as well.
I've heard you talk about like going to Ishigaki, down in that Ryukyu area and that whole Okinawa area of islands. It's a whole little chain unto itself. But I guess is that an often hit area by typhoons? Do they get a lot of that extreme weather?
Yeah, that's a great question. And a lot of people don't realize just how stretched out Japan is, how far it is from that icy northern tip of Hokkaido all the way down to like the southernmost island in Okinawa. It's thousands of kilometers. And down there, it's in the, some of the hottest part of the Western Pacific. The seawater down there is warm, especially in the summer. And that is the fuel for these big typhoons. So the storms which roll through the islands down there can be fearsome, really as strong as they get, in the peak months, July, August, September, October. So I do find myself down there a lot. I see it as a privilege just to be able to visit these stunning islands that I just kind of almost feel at home down there, despite the bad weather. There's something quite amazing about those islands, just the natural beauty of them, the vastness of the Pacific. You're in Hawaii, Tony, I think. I'm sure you kind of get that similar vibe of just being on this small spot of land in a very, very big ocean. It's humbling, just experiencing this crazy weather, being in such a beautiful location, and it's just a full-on assault of nature. It's quite unique and remarkable.
Yeah. I mean, we do get hurricanes here from time to time. Thankfully, I've never been in a very severe one here, but it is a little bit more concerning when you're on, this more isolated. Well, Hawaii is, I think, like the most isolated chain of islands in the world. So there you go. But, compared to like Miami, Florida, it's like, it's easier to get there. It's easier to get supplies. It's easier to get in and out and this and that. But when you're like on this little island, there's, I don't know, it feels a little bit different to me at least. But I'm not originally from here. So maybe that, I don't know. But yeah, definitely with Okinawa, I can only imagine, some of those even more remote remote islands, because like I said, there's so many. Like it's not just the main island of Okinawa, like the Naha area and all that. You know, there's so many others, you know, outside of that, and tiny little islands.
Well, you bring up a good point, and the Japanese are masters of this. You know, because there are so many small kind of islands, which, as you say, are difficult to get to. The transport links, you know, by plane or by ship. You know, they have to be built to withstand the worst weather in the world. It's as simple as that. And the Japanese have done that masterfully. There's nowhere else in the world which is as hurricane resistant, designed to endure these storms with minimal damage and minimal fuss than the Ryukyu Islands, Okinawa. It's I think a lot of places in the world could study, you know, the way they do. It means the architecture can be a bit brutal in places. Or, you know, a lot of the houses are just concrete kind of little fortresses, but the typhoons roll through. They generally cause minor disruption, even the strong category 3s, category 4s. And the next day, more or less, everything is as it was. You know, you don't see destroyed buildings. You don't have power cuts for weeks and weeks. That's just non-existent. Doesn't happen there. It's quite interesting. Quite amazing.
And I don't hear about it. You know, like I watch a lot of Japanese news and stuff, and rarely do I hear, you know, like I can't think of a natural disaster that severely impact, you know, Okinawa to the point like the floods in Kyushu, for example.
No, exactly. So I'm down there. They're not news. So I'm just free to go around and not worry about the news people because they're not interested.
Yeah.
As soon as you go up to Kyushu, suddenly it's big news, you know, because you got the mountains, you got the flooding, you got the biggest cities and everything. So it's harder to bulletproof, you know, a huge landmass with mountains, rivers, and everything versus a small island. It's just a whole different challenge that we face in, you know, the home islands of Japan.
Yeah, like I mean, the extra added factor, of course, is also the mountains, where you have a lot of these landslides that end up, you know, a result of heavy rains, right? And then you get like the trains like the train tracks get covered in the mud and all that, and it's kind of like a chain reaction. It's like one thing leads to another, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And
it's really hard to predict, you know, which valley is gonna get the flood. You know, one valley can have this crazy flash flood and a village is wiped out, but the surrounding areas are kind of okay. That's kind of one thing I've noticed just witnessing these floods. And Taiwan is kind of the same as well. They got really crazy terrain there, and they've had, you know, got a history of really terrible flooding disasters as well. But it's scary, you know. There's just the water, the force of water when it's, you know, cascading off mountains and you know, raging floods. Nothing stops it. It's scary.
Yeah. So in January, so last month, let's see, what is this? We are in 2023. So yeah, January 2023, Japan got a whole bunch of snow and ice. They had some horrible, you know, like really cold temperatures. And I was watching some videos that you were, you know, that you did during this time. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Where did you go? What did you see?
Yeah, it's well, we're in obviously the grips of winter here now, and Japanese winters can be pretty wild. You know, snow. You know, some of the towns in Japan are, you know, some of the snowiest towns in the world. And again, something I was clueless to before I arrived here, and something that a lot of people don't really realize. You know, Tokyo gets no snow. Maybe once every year we'll get, you know,
a little bit,
inch, but that's about it.
Yeah.
But you drive 3 hours and you are literally in some of the snowiest towns in the world, where they get 10, 15 feet a year, which is just mind-boggling, you know. You don't have to travel very far. But yeah, last week? We had this crazy cold surge sweeping in from, you know, China and Russia. And that brought a lot of heavy snow, strong winds. It really piled up in the mountains. Sadly, there were quite a few avalanche incidents over the weekend. There was a very famous skier from the US who tragically got killed.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Avalanche in Hakuba, which is terrible news, and a snowboarder, I think, in Gunma prefecture was caught up in one as well. So, the snow, so much of the kind of Japan depends on the snow, the ski resorts and the farmers and everything. But yeah, it's a double-edged sword. It can cause some big problems as well.
Where specifically did you go to get the footage that you were? I saw you uploading to Twitter and YouTube.
So I went to a place called Myoko, which is a famous skiing and snowboarding town, and is one of the snowiest places in Japan. The snowfalls they get there are colossal.
What prefecture is this in?
That's in Niigata prefecture.
Oh, okay, yeah. Niigata is very well known. I mean, I've never been to it, but like, it's one of those places people know. Like, Niigata is like a super snow capital. Like, they get a lot of snow.
It's great.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
But this time, I kind of chased this. Usually, I just kind of hole up, not where the mountains begin, because that's usually where the snow really starts dumping it down. But this time, because it was so cold, even right by the coast, it was below freezing. So I was like, I want to check this out. I want to go right up to the coast and see, you can stand on the beach and watch this crazy weather just roll off the ocean. You got these big bubbling clouds, and then once they hit, they're called snow squalls. They're nuts. There's something you don't get to see very often. So I went chasing those and was just like, oh my gosh. The wind blowing the snow around, and driving my car, and it'll be fine 1 minute, and then 5 minutes later you're struggling to see 20, 30 feet in front of you. It's really something quite wild, and it was quite invigorating, just personally, because it's been a while since I've been in some weather. Just because typhoon season was finished a while ago, and not much has been going on, so it was good to blow the cobwebs away, get the new camera working, just have some stuff to shoot and put a story together for YouTube. So it was a quick trip, 2 days, but man, it felt like I shot like a week's worth of material.
Did you have any trouble getting around in terms of transportation? Because there were so many stories about trains getting stalled and, trouble with transportation and people not being able to, like, for example, supermarkets not getting like vegetables and things like that because of how bad the weather was.
Yeah, it was. I've got my own car, and I deliberately bought a car which can handle snow. Personally, I was fine, but I was really impressed with. I was planning my trip back to Tokyo, and I was expecting to have to detour around closed highways and stuff. But actually, they managed to figure that out. It was rough. It was really, really, really rough driving conditions. And, I wouldn't have recommended anyone be on the road in those conditions. But no, the road was open, and I was able to get everywhere I wanted to go, which is, again, Japan, when they come to their preparedness of the Niigata gets snow, they know how to deal with the snow. And they do an amazing job of keeping the highways open when these big snowstorms hit.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect that some of the places that had the worst issues were probably the places that are not used to that much snow and all of a sudden. But Niigata, they know. I mean, like I've never been to Niigata, but I hear stories like they have doors on the second floor because the snow goes up that high, and they can just like go out their second floor onto the snow. Right? Like that's what I've heard. But yeah.
Niigata gets snow, it's fine. When places like Osaka or Fukuoka or even Tokyo get snow, it's like, ugh. Things start to grind to a halt.
Yeah.
That's very much the case. Yeah.
Yeah, like I would see news reports is like, look at this bicycle, it's frozen.
Well, even in Tokyo, I think a lot of people, like they were losing their hot water because the pipes were freezing and stuff.
Oh, man,
it doesn't happen that often. So I'm not what I'll call a disaster, but inconvenience.
Definitely, yeah. Have you been in any, for example, like volcano, like in Japan? I know you have in other places, but in Japan, like covered any volcano eruptions or anything like that, like down in Kagoshima, maybe?
So when you mentioned you lived in Kagoshima, my ears perked up. I was like, "Ooh, nice!" Because that's somewhere I've spent quite a lot of time down at Sakurajima.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, all Kyushu for the volcanoes in Japan. So Sakurajima, which is for those who are listening, is Japan's most active volcano, and the city of Kagoshima, you almost feel like the volcano's towering above you. It's amazing, a beautiful place. God, I love Kyushu. Want to get back to it. And then just north of Sakurajima, you have this big volcanic complex called Kirishima.
Oh.
And that was erupting. That first erupted for the first time in a long time back in 2011, just before the big earthquake. That was incredible eruption then. And then it erupted even more spectacularly in 2017, where I hiked up to a neighboring crater and just watched this whole eruption unfold in front of my eyes. It was one of the most remarkable things I've ever seen in my whole career. It was spectacular. But thankfully, those eruptions are more kind of just a bit of a pain in the butt rather than, again, because those volcanoes erupt regularly and people are used to them. So I don't mind watching them and filming them and being like, wow, this is awesome. You know, I don't feel guilty because it's it's a regular occurrence down there. So
Right. But I know you have been to some other more severe ones outside of Japan, right? That actually they caused some damage.
So Indonesia, the volcanoes are pretty fierce down there. Like Krakatau, which your listeners might be familiar with. Krakatoa was the old name. That's a pretty notorious one. Merapi as well, the Philippines. But I want to kind of expand my volcano range and go to some new countries, maybe South America in the future, and Hawaii, of course. I've been to.
Yeah. Oh, you've been down here to the Big Islands.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, in 2018, I was there for the Leilani Estates eruption, which was very unfortunate that one. The way it just.
Yeah, I remember that.
That was crazy. You know, just watching fissures open up in a neighborhood and lava spewing everywhere. It was nuts.
Yeah. So I think many people might be wondering this, and I'm personally curious as well. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you went like, oh, I pushed a bit too far, maybe like I was a little too reckless, you got any stories like that?
Yeah, it does. It happens from time to time. You just get a little, I think, too comfortable and almost over familiar with the storms or the volcanoes or whatever, and you kind of let your guard down a bit. Yeah, there was I did almost lose a rental car in Japan once.
Oh, whoa!
Parking
How did that happen?
I wasn't in it at the time. Parking it in the wrong place.
Oh,
it's like. Suddenly noticed that the waves were kind of crashing over the seawall and the water was coming up to my knees. I was like, oh my God, I better move this car before it gets kind of written off.
Yeah.
There was an unfortunate kind of circumstances in the Philippines in 10 years ago now. Gosh, time flies. In Super Typhoon Haiyan, which was a devastating typhoon which hit the city of Tacloban in the southern Philippines. And my friend I was with, unfortunately, he got injured in the typhoon as well. So, these kind of unforeseen circumstances do crop up, and it's about kind of dealing with them quickly and getting yourself out of that immediate kind of crazy situation safely. But yeah, a few kind of random near misses, which are totally out of my control. I'm pretty good at assessing risk and keeping myself safe, but windows blowing in, roof tiles landing next to me, that kind of thing. It happens quite a lot.
So, like, do you like? Well, I mean, blowing in. So that's like a typhoon kind of heavy, winds and all that situation.
Yeah.
Like, do you like wear anything? Do you like what do you do to kind of like protect yourself in those situations?
Yeah, a helmet is a really good idea. So I do wear a climbing helmet. I should invest in some skydiving goggles because eye protection can be important as well. Just because it doesn't take much wind for just stuff to get in your eyes, and you don't want to be hurting your eyes in storms. And this is going to sound really silly, but a good pair of boots and protect your feet. Because it's very easy if you're walking through water to kind of cut your leg open, or again, like, what was it? Ishigaki. I was in Ishigaki filming a typhoon. It wasn't that strong. I was like, I'll be fine in flip-flops. Into the car, get blown down the street. The flip-flops scrunch up, hurt my toe. I was like, I'm so dumb. I shouldn't be doing this. Wear proper shoes.
Yeah.
That's a really minor example, but it just goes to show that you if you're geared up properly, it can stop you getting hurt.
Definitely. Yeah. Have you been in any or covered any earthquake related, I guess it would be the aftermath, because we can't really predict it, but have you been in any situation like that?
Yeah, I did cover the aftermath of the 2011 mega quake up in Tohoku. The tsunami. That I did 2 trips to cover that, and that was something else on a completely different scale. Disasters of that magnitude are thankfully quite rare, but when you kind of witness it all firsthand, it's very, very, very sobering. And some of those images are just seared into my mind of absolute destruction. And what was strange about that one especially was, again, Japan is so well geared up for earthquakes, the shaking. You're driving through a town which has seen massive shaking, and you could mostly not even tell. Most of the buildings are fine. There's the odd older building destroyed or whatever, but for the most part, everything looked normal. And then you go down the hill, and then you see kind of which was also quite surreal as well, there'd be a sign going tsunami inundation zone. So you're entering and then suddenly, just 100% catastrophic destruction. Every building destroyed, an entire kind of neighborhood wiped out. And it's like, oh my God, you go, 100 meters that way and you'd have no idea. It was just really crazy.
That is so weird. Yeah, because it's such a clear delineation, right? Weather, like a typhoon, whatever, you have a general area, like snow, it kind of all happens at the same, but the tsunami is destroyed. Okay. It's this clear line.
The houses on the hill, absolutely fine. Everything below them wiped out. Ships washed in, everything burned, cars on top of buildings and stuff. Yeah, it's there were forces of nature at work there that were truly impossible to wrap my head around. It's just like, wow. Yeah. So not to be messed with.
Yeah. And so at that time, you weren't in Japan, right? You were living outside of Japan at that time?
Yeah, I was in Hong Kong at the time. So
did you have any trouble getting in? And because I know things were pretty crazy at the time.
It was pretty crazy. The first time I managed to get in was 4 days after. So on the 15th of March, I think it was, I had to fly to Nagoya and then get a flight to Niigata, and then drive from Niigata City across Honshu to the Ishinomaki, north of Sendai.
Right.
And spent 1 day there, and then had to leave. So, then came back about a month later and spent a longer time once things had calmed down, just 3 days, just traveling through the region. Documenting what was going on. And even 1 month later, it was just like it had happened the day before.
Right. Yeah. And were you basically just living out your car at the time? Because how does that work?
What was I doing? That's a good point. I can't remember. I wasn't sleeping in the car. But again, once you were inland a bit, it was fine because all the power had been restored and stuff. So I think I was based in Ishinomaki City and then just kind of traveling from there. and just driving around but they had fuel rationing for the cars and things like that, and it was
Sure.
you know yeah, but again, very, very sobering experience. And I don't want to sound cliched and whatever, people always say this, but it was just so humbling, like just the way that people were dealing with it. Such a kind of calm and collected, civilized manner, given the trauma they were experiencing. It was like, wow, yeah. Puts your own small problems into perspective.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I was living in Japan at the time, but I wasn't in that area. But nevertheless, it was a very strange just to be there, and the news, they're constantly, and that was all they were talking. Of course, the radiation and all that was going on as well. But it was just such a overall, like, weird vibe. Obviously, it's such an understatement, but just the whole feeling in the country was just so strange. And I didn't know. I was like, I can't do anything. Like, I feel weird.
I hear that a lot from people. That the exact same sentiment. It's really interesting from friends who were here when it happened. Of just how weird it was and surreal, like literally the whole country just shaken and everyone in shock and like, oh my gosh, what happens now? I can't imagine what it must have been like.
I mean, and again, I was down in Kobe, so I wasn't directly affected, but it was still very strange experience. So it seems like a lot of these things, happen suddenly. I mean, with a typhoon, you have some anticipation, but some of these things might happen pretty suddenly. Do you have like your pack of stuff ready to go? Like, could you kind of like move, within a really short amount of time and get out there?
Yeah, that's a large part of what I do is jumping onto the internet to book a flight which leaves in 2 hours and then race to the airport. There's a lot of that. It's all the gear's kind of ready to be thrown into a bag and just jump on the train to the airport kind of thing. As you said, with the weather, you do get more of a heads up. So sometimes I can get a week's kind of notice that something might be happening. The volcanoes can be a little shorter notice. But even with the weather, sometimes it's like I'll just put off making the decision to the last moment. I'm like, is it going to hit this island? Is it going to miss?
True,
it's going to hit, right, go, boom. Last flight in. And that's actually part of this, which I really enjoy. It's like figuring out a complex puzzle. You got the target, which is whatever, say the eye of the typhoon on a small island, but the getting there is you got to jump through all these hoops, figure out all this stuff. And I actually really kind of I think I'll be a travel agent in another professional life, but for like explorers. Right, you need to get here. Right, how are we going to do that? Let's figure this out.
Right, and I'm sure in many situations it's like flights are starting to get canceled and there's less and less options.
Well, yeah, it's like the time I had to get to, what was it? I had to race to Hong Kong for a typhoon. Every flight from Tokyo was full, so I was like, how do I get to Hong Kong? Right, bullet train to Nagoya, get a flight from Nagoya to Hong Kong via Taiwan, and arrive 12 hours before the typhoon hits, which is cutting it fine. So it's fun. It's exciting.
I mean, it is, and it kind of gets me excited just to hear about this. I do enjoy that kind of like go here, go there, like figure it out.
You're landing in one airport, waiting for your luggage, and you're booking your onward flight on your phone for the next country. It's crazy. And it's like, what is this? This was all pre-corona.
It's not for but I mean, but anyway, it's not for everyone, but the people that love it, I guess. But I'm curious though, like, what about like booking flights like last minute in terms of price? Like, do you manage to get like surprisingly good deals, or is it like stupid expensive?
Yeah, there's some good little tricks. Most of the time, because it's usually within Asia, so it's not very far to travel. I think below 4 or 5 hours, the price usually doesn't change a huge amount. If you're flying long haul, it can be a bit. You have to just suck it up and. Though I did once get from Tokyo to Miami for like $650 return.
That's pretty nice. That is pretty damn nice. Yeah.
I was like, whoa.
I think that's like half price because it used to be like around 1,200, 1,300.
Yeah, that was a good one. That was a few years back. But you know, there's some good little tricks. Like, you know, if you're flying in Japan, you know, this is a good tip for anyone who's traveling. Always book the flight. Never book the flight on the same day, though most normal people would never do that. If you book it the day before, you know, not only can you usually fully cancel the tickets before departure for basically $4 or whatever for nothing, you get them much cheaper as well. So it's, you know, just things you learn over the years, little tricks to stay away from like the low cost carriers like Peach and people like that who are really annoying with their cabin bag. You know, I got cameras, I got drones with me. My bags weigh a ton and they're always, you know, giving me hassle. Your bag's too heavy. I'm like, oh, leave me alone. I'm happy to pay whatever you want to charge, but then no, it has to go in the suitcase. I'm like, no.
Yeah. No, that's a good tip. I mean, you know, LCCs are good if you're just, you know, if you're not in that sort of situation. I guess the beach and all that. But
just like, look, my carry-on bag weighs 20 kilos. It'll fit in the space. Just let me know how much it'll cost, and I'll pay it, and then just leave me alone. Stop making me put expensive stuff in the suitcase.
Yeah. Okay, so then is there anything like specifically that you're working on right now that you want to let people know about? I mean, I know you regularly upload to YouTube and you're always, you know, active on Twitter, but is there any like specific projects or something that you're...
that's thanks for giving me a chance to bring it up. But no, the YouTube thing, I've had a YouTube channel for 16 years now.
Yeah, wow. That's pretty crazy,
17 years, which is crazy. But I've been really lazy with it. All I would used to do is just throw up kind of raw footage onto YouTube. Some of it would go viral. Awesome, isn't this cool? But now I'm actually really kind of pivoting more towards making content tailored for YouTube. So bringing people along on the storm chases and volcano expeditions and things like that. So it's my youtube.com/Earth Uncut TV, and I'm really getting into the whole vlogging and filmmaking thing now. So it's very much the beginning of the journey, so I'm still figuring out that side of things and being a little bit experimental and having fun with it. But it's something I'm going to put a lot of energy into, and I want to see if I can make that succeed. So it'll take a while.
Yeah. Like I watched one where you were talking about a volcano that you went to, and it was like you talking to the screen and narrating and showing the footage, and it's very. I think that's the kind of stuff that does very well on YouTube. You know, once you get a few of those, then you get that flywheel effect, right?
That's what I'm trying to do now. So it's got a mix of kind of me in the field shooting and then making videos around that. And then during the quieter times, I want to produce, sit down, talking to camera type content. You know, I want people to go on YouTube and be on my channel and be able to just hang out on the channel, watching different kind of stuff from different events and stuff, and just find it interesting, learn something. That's very important. I do want it to be a kind of useful. It's not just some crazy adrenaline junkie,
right.
chasing storms and being an idiot. It's trying to be much more than that. And also, just visually present these phenomena and the behind the scenes look of chasing these things in a way that other storm chasers aren't doing. So just a little more of an artistic cinematic angle I'm aiming for as well. So because some of the places I go, some of the locations out of the way, places I would never ever go if I wasn't doing my job, are absolutely incredibly stunning, epic locations, and I really want to try and capture that as well.
Yeah, and like footage without context is like, oh, look at that, okay, I'll like that, okay, and then that's kind of it. But when you have that personal story and or the stories of the people that you encounter along the way, that's the stuff that sticks in your head, right? That's the stuff that you go like, oh yeah, I watched this video, you should check this out, and then people talk about it.
Hit the nail on the head there. So
I've
never called myself a filmmaker, and I'm not a filmmaker yet anyway, but that's kind of the way I'd like to pivot.
Yeah. And I'll tell you this, look, maybe it's just, us sucker Americans, but we love the accent. And when you start telling these stories in the accent, it's so engaging, man. It really is. It's like, oh man, I want to hear what this guy has to say. Like,
no, that's good. I'll take whatever little kind of cheats and advantages I can get.
Yeah. The gravitas and the tone and the accent. Oh, it works. I eat it up. I love it.
I'm glad to hear that.
So the Twitter and the YouTube, you can, what was the handle again?
So it's Earth Uncut TV, all one word. So
gotcha.
That's me. And it's all nature and having, when I'm not chasing, it's just having fun. It's all positive. I try to keep them positive places. So if you're into nature and kind of lifestyle stuff,
yeah.
That's my post on Twitter.
Awesome. All right. So check out Earth Uncut. I will, of course, include a link in the show notes. But thank you so much for making time and talking and sharing your stories. Thank you.
It's been a lot of fun. I love the whole podcast format. It's relaxing, and it's fun to share some of these stories. So thanks for having me.
Just do it!